Speaking of horrors,
Oh,
it's
this one
always a
is
good time to talk about, not necessarily related to Windows or Patch Tuesday, but man, this Operation Triangulation thing is got to be
insane.
the most well-researched exploit that I've seen in a very long time. I think something that's really, we've been following pretty closely over the last, about really month or 2 months is kind of the newest zero-click iMessage attack, and walking through the exploit chain. It's called Operation Triangulation. So it was presented at the 37th Chaos Communication Conference. I think that's in Hamburg, right? And the researchers showed through basically like 6 months of investigation, a new exploit, a new attack chain on iOS. And I think it impacted more than just iOS, right? Mac OS, probably Apple TV. I don't know who's exploiting Apple TV, but I'm sure it's all just reused all the way through. And
if you remember that, Don, but
right? How many? Like 6 or 7 vulnerabilities, like chained together 6 or 7 vulnerabilities with any,
as one does.
The iOS ecosystem, right? Where we start with probably the funniest one, if you can call it
random
funny.
true type exploit.
Yeah. 2023 41990 that got fixed back, midsummer, where you take a PDF and there's this true type font exploit, right? Then use a ROP chain. You get all the way through, and then you kernel exploit with JavaScript, open up Safari, do a Safari exploit, and then use that exploit to exploit the iOS kernel, and kind of on your way to backdooring the phone. Which, I mean, just reading through this thing, it's absolutely incredible. And I'm curious your thoughts too, Cody.
Yeah, it's insane. And, that kernel exploit, like they have 2 of them that span 5, I think, 5 different generations of processors. So yeah, it's just crazy the complexity that went into this. Or at least the research that went into this on, the threat actor side. Whoever that may be.
Whoever it may be. I mean, you look at it and you're like, okay, this is chaining together, a long series of extremely high dollar, high complexity, 0-day exploits, and has an extreme focus on both cleanup and targeting to make sure it's really on the right device, the precise right devices, and only those devices. And it kind of screams out. It screams out who it is. This is, I have no knowledge of this from my days in government, but this is Five Eyes hacking if I've ever seen it. Because it's just, those are their the normal priorities of the exploits. The exploits aren't really so much of a limiting factor, and you can do it in a really wild way where everything just, and I think too the other piece that's just glorious here is 11,000 lines of code mainly dedicated to JavaScript core and kernel memory parsing and manipulation, right?
Right.
The level of conditioning that it does on the machine to meet the necessary conditions for the exploits to work is just phenomenal, right? This is like,
I know.
Kind of going back to what you were saying before, Cody, about, hey, we're doing fuzzing, but it's this 1 in 5 million chance of well, here's how you find 1 in 5 million, and here's how you find 1 in 5 million on the fly on target, and that's pretty darned impressive. I mean, this is just a fantastic piece of
I just don't know
hacking
how
here.
And this first vulnerability that it just starts at the very top, right? 2024 214001, which is a Microsoft Entra, Jira, the Jira plugin, SSO privilege escalation vulnerability. And essentially what this is, you know, anybody that hasn't updated their Jira plugin, and I believe it's both cloud and on-premise, is subject to kind of a privilege escalation of privilege vulnerability where an attacker can basically take over your Jira instance just by sending a specifically crafted payload. And, I don't know if everyone remembers, back in the summer, there was a no-auth vulnerability, right? That I think Dscope published it. I can't remember. But it's essentially the same thing, right? There's a flaw in the AZ Entra ID now, what they're calling it, tenant infrastructure, where it you just have to change your email and you can get into pretty much anything. So quite the interesting attack vector, right? We think cloud, we think a little safer than this, but yeah, out there for the taking. And Jason, I'm curious to your thoughts on this one, and given your history, right, how juicy of a vulnerability this would be in your mind.
This is actually, it's fairly juicy on the surface because, taking over any network service is a lot of fun. And I mean, this looks pretty straightforward. The attack complexity is low. The impact to confidentiality, integrity, availability, all high. Unfortunately, it's just as far to Microsoft's knowledge, it's proof of concept only, but, just modifying or throwing that script allows you to update the SAML metadata and change authentication of the application from the owner's Entra ID tenant to your the attacker's tenant is pretty juicy. But where this really gets bad is the fact that so much sensitive data ends up in Jira at every organization. Jira is, it obviously it's a ticketing system. It can be from the IT team, security team, engineering team. If you have engineers and developers on your staff, so wide applicability across most businesses. And if you don't have really good data hygiene or really like ticketing hygiene principles to keep sensitive data out of there, then you're potentially looking at two breaches here, one to get into Jira and one then with an actor potentially exploiting something based on what's in Jira. So that's why this one really got my attention, is that it's this implication of, that sort of secondary possibility, which could be, more than two. It could be quite a few out of the information in Jira. So this one's definitely a must to patch right away from my perspective. Seth, I don't know if do you see it the same way? Do you think that this is sort of a larger systemic risk to an organization using Jira, or do you think it's narrowly scoped?
No, I definitely think so as well. Especially the attack vector. I mean, they don't even have to be authenticated or anything. So they can get in with that payload and relatively easy. So
yeah,
definitely an interesting one. And I was, it's funny too, because like when vulnerabilities like this come out, there's always like someone always goes on Shodan and like looks how many public Jira instances
Yep.
exist on the internet, right?
Yep.
And this is a little off topic, but I thought it was interesting. Like, in the community, I saw a post where people were complaining about honeypots, where like they were,
I saw
adding, changing
was,
the numbers. They were like, there's more honeypot Jira instances on the public-facing internet than actual ones. So like,
yeah, by an order of magnitude.
You're right. So when those numbers come out and people see them, like, oh, there's 300,000 exposed Jira instances on the internet, right? And someone's like, well, there's probably only like 5,000, and the rest are honeypots. And
yep.
I just think back, like, as an industry, it's such a security thing.
It is, and the other interesting thing is that not all of those honeypots are benevolent. So
Right.
even if somebody doesn't have, even if there's a bad actor out there who's not able to figure out the particulars of this, there's value in having those because most of the time actors are not going to take the necessary extra steps to validate, hey, is this Jira with Entra ID enabled? They're just going to throw it and see what happens. And, a lot of that's going to get eaten up by those honeypots. And if another actor has one, well, they're going to start throwing it as well. And it becomes this is the sort of bug that becomes a free for all for exploitation rather quickly. So, just don't just take the CVSS 9.8's word for it. Take ours as well. This is one you want to patch right away.
Yeah, agreed. CVE 2024-21400, and it's a pretty long one, so bear with me here. Microsoft Azure Kubernetes Service Confidential Container Elevation of Privilege Vulnerability. If they added a couple more words to it, I think it would be easier to say. But, reading through the notes, to me, this sounds like, right, an attacker who successfully exploited this vulnerability could steal credentials and affect resources beyond the security scope managed by Azure Kubernetes Service Confidential Containers, right? And, I'm speculating a little bit here, but just reading this, it sounds like I can get onto a node of a managed Kubernetes service. And Matt, yeah, and I'm also curious, right, having spent so much time inside and outside Kubernetes, kind of what your take is on this and almost like, what makes your hair stand up when you see things like this?
Yeah, so I think sort of just with everyday Kubernetes clusters, things that we run in, that everybody runs in their prod environment, it's really not secure by default. You really have to put in the work to make it secure. And I think with this confidential computing, when we think of confidential computing, we think security and it's locked down, it's isolated, it could be like air gapped, whatever. And so I think with this vulnerability, that just unleashes so many possibilities for an attacker to jump on a confidential system and either extract secrets, just like you said, parts of the node, any sort of things on the node, workloads like pods. And from what I'm reading, it's with this ConfCom CLI tool. And I just think, if you're running a really sensitive workload in confidential computing, I think the thought is this should be secure. And this kind of opens up, just the possibilities for so much just private sensitive information to be utilized by an attacker.
Right.
Yeah. When I saw the part about, an attacker can access the untrusted AKS Kubernetes node and AKS confidential container to take over confidential guests and containers beyond the network stack it might be bound to, that alarmed me pretty good because, to Tom's point, this is a bit of speculation, but that sounds like this is a cross tenant attack. And, if so, that breaks the security assumptions that a lot of folks have and really presents an elevated risk.
Yeah. Especially in a hosted environment, right? When I see something like, and the patch notes say it verbatim, an unauthenticated attacker can move the same workload onto a machine they control where the attacker is root. And, where my head gets spinning is like, I'm an attacker. Do I have an AKS cluster? And then I'm moving workloads from that for somewhere where I have access to like these other nodes, right? Like that's where I'm stuck. That's where I'm paranoid. Is like,
I'm trying to think
am I
of like
spoofing like kubelet or something, and I'm moving their internal node onto my node through like some kind of weird internal kubelet attack, right? Like,
I mean, could it be something with etcd as well, like state
right?
or something like that, or maybe I don't know, like yeah, I was just thinking that same thing, like trying to figure out how they would kind of move those workloads whatever those might be, onto their own system. And so it's probably got to do something with the backend or state or something that's saving
Yeah, or
whatever
like
those workloads
exporting
are
the
doing, right?
containers. Like
Yeah.
you can dump the container with Docker or etc. and export it and move it off. And yeah, scary stuff to be honest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a little surprised it only got a 9.0 on the CVSS scale, but
Yeah,
on the other hand, the exploit code maturity is listed as proof of concept. So fingers crossed that this one, it was caught early, and if you patch quickly enough, your exposure will be minimal. But definitely not one to put off. This is a must do.
yeah, agreed. And a lot of it is just kind of knowing what you're running and under, understanding the security implications of that, right? Like a lot of the times we trust these vendors to manage a lot of this back end risk, and these things come up and it's important.
Yeah, I
And
mean this is the kind of risk that we spend all day, every day managing, and it's not easy, and it's constant. You can never let your guard down, and why we have so many people on our team, it requires a lot of investment, and it requires just constant vigilance.
yeah,
Yep.
agreed.
And just like Tom said, observability is huge, right? Having visibility into your whole stack. And I mean, if you don't have that and you don't know what's running, like you can't baseline that, and then you don't know when something bad is in there. So
Right. Then you got to get your detections right. You got to tune those detections so you don't get alert fatigue. You got to automate your alerts. You got to automate some of your responses. You have to have a playbook that you've rehearsed and practiced again and again and again. And it is not a minimal thing.
Speaking of Linux, man, it's been a spicy couple weeks for open source and in the Linux community with XZ, the XZ outbreak, whatever we're calling it, CVE 2024-3094. I'm sure everyone that's listening's heard about it, but essentially what's happened is XZ, which is kind of a collection of open source utilities, was basically backdoored, and the developers of the package, right? Like, and Cody, I'm really curious your take on this, but in my mind, it's like open source. Everyone's thoughts on it have always been the more eyes, the better, right? But truly, in this case, that's one or two developers. They're tired. They're probably working full time. They don't want to maintain it. They don't, or they have, initially enjoyed doing it, and now they don't because it's underfunded. No one wants to contribute, and they have a whole bunch of bugs to deal with. So someone comes along, a couple, 2-3 years, and starts making changes to it, makes it, makes performance improvements, and you start to kind of relinquish control to them, and in this case, it turns out that was a really horrible mistake.
Yep. Yeah, like just building up that rapport over time, and we see it in a few. Like we found a few other ones that are currently being analyzed too. So this may be spread out more than just XZ, but and not necessarily by the same Jatan actor, but
Okay.
yeah, no, it was very interesting that they did this very long, slow play of actively contributing and then slowly putting in backdoors and giving interesting justifications for a lot of these, right? Like,
Right.
especially one of the other ones that's under analysis is libarchive, and
Okay.
was actually by Jatan, where they moved to an insecure version of printf, I think was what it was, and it allows for arbitrary control sequences to be ran. So when they're unzipping an archive, you can now potentially embed control sequences and have that run in the terminal. But at the same time, it was also interesting to see that right as everything got pushed in, so they finally got a working exploit or this working backdoor in the code. It was interesting that for all of the carefulness that they did, they suddenly went to creating a lot of these fake accounts everywhere. As we found the one, I think it was Hans Jensen, was one of the first ones we saw.
Yeah.
And you know, they tried to shroud it, right? So they created this new account, and then they tried to go to a bunch of places and have them push for this upgrade to one. What was it? .6.1, I think was, or .6.0 and .6.1.
Yeah.
And but then they would try to shroud it with a commit history by going and taking old commits of other projects and then just randomly updating them. And I think we spent like that entire last weekend going through, I don't even know, probably like 50 commits, because each of these commits had, you know, a good 2,000 to some of them had like 15,000 lines of code. And yeah, and in all of those cases, it's like they tried to not do anything in these, you know, and just try to build up that credibility
Right.
in other places.
Yeah. Like those commit sizes are always like, you know, I always feel bad when I see commits that large because it's just like no one's actually going to read all that. Like, let's be honest, no one's going to go line from line for any of that. Like, you might see a principal dev or something dig in a little bit, but they're mostly just going to be like, do a 15-second scroll up and down real quick and be like, looks good to me.
Right. Maybe run some kind of analysis tool if you're lucky.
And think about that too. You know, one of the reasons it was even caught was due to Valgrind and a bunch of Valgrind failures, and they actually had 3 or 4 devs, which I don't think that they were complicit. I think it was just that they were able to convince them that these Valgrind issues were an issue with Valgrind, and I saw that like they were trying to get these pushed through other good developers. You know, saying, "Hey, it's okay. You know, we're seeing this same thing, and this seems to be a bug, and whatever."
Yeah.
Yeah, this a whole very interesting affair.
Yeah.
Not to mention, too, you know, they also became contributors of OSS fuzz to try and. I think it was like iFunk to prevent OSS fuzz from picking up on it.
Yep.
That was crazy.
Oh, and the meme commit where they removed all the information and security.
Oh yeah, I did see that.
And then, they were like, "Hey, you know, privately let us know, and it'll take like 90 days or something." And it was just trying to maximize their you know, time on the
window.
market.
Yeah, the window of opportunity.
Yeah, I think they hit 34 days, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, their pace was incredible for sure.
Yeah.
Up until that last bit, though, like I said, I think that's where they failed. If they didn't have so many people, like if they didn't take a bunch of these accounts that were either, you know, stolen or paid for, which had like 0 commit history in a long time, but that had commit history, so they were trying to use it as social credit, or just creating one of these fake accounts, I think that this would have lasted a lot longer.
Yeah.
Or, you know, maybe they could have continued trying to make little arguments against some of these things, like with Valgrind, or for I saw one of the mailing lists right off the bat where you know, they reverse engineered some of the shell code, and they might have been able to keep it down, because I think GitHub, right? GitHub brought it down, and Salta brought it down because of all of these other fake accounts. So that's what I wonder, like, if this was just a very siloed event, would they have brought all of this down? And would their remotes have brought down the, you know, the affected tarballs?
Yeah. I mean, I assume so, because it's just the abuse potential, and right, like,
yeah,
I assume GitHub doesn't want to be associated with it at all, right? Like, they try to do a good job of cleaning up all the nefarious stuff, right? But like, I mean, there's plenty of tools hosted out there, like PowerShell Empire and stuff, right? Mimikatz and the like, where like,
it's just research,
educational purposes only, quote unquote. And it's like in everybody's exploit kit ever on anything, you know?
Oh yeah, no, I just more meant, like, would GitHub have pulled this down if it weren't for all the obvious fake accounts trying to push it, right? Like, if this were such a minimal, like, if they would have went the route of trying to keep slow rolling it and just made a minimal fuss, throughout all of it. How long could they have kept this going?
Very true. I also find it interesting that it ended up in, homebrew on Mac, right?
Yeah.
Like it, obviously Mac's not impacted because of those checks in the very beginning, but that's how homebrew works, right? It pulls down the code, it does a configure, and it does a make. Like it builds it from the tarball. And when I first saw this, I'm like, oh god, this is going to be a nightmare scenario. But luckily, the maintainers of Brew quickly reverted back to 5.4.5 or whatever the version was. But still, it was like all those commits came from the same person, and they were malicious. I didn't check on what they were doing now about it because I know they tore down the repo, and it's probably still hosted on SourceForge or something, right? Because Homebrew pulls from like GitHub, SourceForge, random thing that people submit to,
Bitbucket,
Bitbucket, all these fun things.
Getia or Get.
Yeah. All those random Gitty.
Yeah.
I just really, though, I admire the intuition that the Microsoft employee had, and the curiosity, that led them to ultimately reporting the backdoor and pretty much saving the world from it.
Yeah.
Hey, why did this thing take extra milliseconds?
Right.
Yeah.
Seriously.
I do appreciate that because it's, it takes people like that to counter,
For real. He could have just wrote it off, It's like, let's just running slow, whatever, but they really dug deep.
Yeah, it was over 3 failures that were in. He couldn't replicate them, right? So, or he couldn't replicate them easily. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of people who just gave up.
Yeah,
Still the bug.
That persistence, is it's an important skill. Just digging in and I got to figure this out. I can't sleep until I know why 500 milliseconds is. My test is slower by 500 milliseconds. Like I appreciate that.
And then reporting it,
Like I found this weirdness in this package. Maybe I should say something to somebody, because I'm sure he's like, oh man, if all these security people are gonna, they might tell me I've lost my mind or something.
Right.
It takes a lot of courage to kind of report that stuff, especially in like OpenWall and those kind of old school distros, right? It's very well.
The learning point for everyone on YouTube: if you see something funky, deep dive.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Any last thoughts, anyone, before we kind of wrap this up?
We can put our conspiracy hats on and think about where the actor came from based on their commit history.
We can save those for our 3 a.m. conspiracy podcast, Going over shortwave radio.
That's right. Tom and I are going to we're going to kick off the new Coast to Coast.
I was going to say, again, baby, let's do it.
Heck yeah, dude.
The Vuln to Vuln AM.
Vuln to Vuln. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, there we go. We get this deep dive at 3 a.m. and talk about like state actors and.
No, nobody steal that. That's now copyrighted.
Yes, it is.
Might already exist. I don't know.
It probably does. Yeah.
So how long until the next XZ incident?
I give it a week. Well, there's already those active investigations right now, right? There's it's spidered out into I think 9 other repos, something like that. Yeah. And there's not a lot of evidence for most of them, but I think there's 2 or 3 in particular that either Jatan had contributed to, and it looked like they were like I said with libarchive and the control sequence stuff, and then there was another one that looks like it was the same sort of thing with a different user, maybe a different user, who knows. So I'm sure this is probably just scratching the surface of probably a lot of other, because there's no way they put all their eggs in one basket, right? Like this was
absolutely not.
So
yeah, and I think things have gotten a little. Honestly, I think things have gotten a little more dangerous, right? In the Chrome patch that came out last week on Friday, right? Where use after free, known exploit, and a lot of the Chrome vulnerabilities, I think last year and this year have kind of followed that same pattern where there's it's just you go to a specifically crafted web page and it overflows the browser and you're able to execute arbitrary code. And, there was always like at least in the industry for a while, there was always that assumption of like, well, as long as they don't download the file, they're okay. Right. But I think a lot of that has changed in the last 5 years where, there's been a lot of O days in Chrome that allow for arbitrary code execution, or, you trick the user to just clicking a link. It brings them to a specifically crafted web page that allows for RCE. And that's kind of the nightmare scenario to a lot of us in the industry.
Yeah. And again, I think this ties well, this Chrome vulnerability, CVE 2024-4671 ties very well to what we were just discussing, because what does use after free get you? Well, it gets you code execution. It may not, and I don't know particularly in this case, but it may not be code execution in the place that you want. You might be inside of a sandbox and not able to do a whole lot. And if that were the case here, or the case for any use after free, where you end up in a place that is not your ultimate desire, then you are going to need something like, again, on a traditional OS, you need a privilege escalation inside a browser. You need a sandbox breakout to really go after the things that you want to get.
Yeah.
And those are hard too. Those sandbox breakouts that's pretty complex.
Yeah.
Like that's not
Good.
Joe's.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Good.
It's not just like some POC you find on GitHub. Well, it might be, but I think the complexity it just adds complexity there too, which
and a lot of people hold this close to their chest, right? Like you don't want to burn your sandbox escape on some, business email compromise thing where you're trying to funnel out $5,000-$10,000 here and there, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
You're saving it for the big bang,
And if you do see somebody burning it on that, then you should really worry what else they got up their sleeve if they're going to burn it on something simple. Kind of alarmed.
I got so many O days here. I'm just going to burn them.
Too good for what they're doing. That's not making me feel great.
Yeah. Just found this random thing on GitHub, going to run it, right? And it's like an O day or something.
I mean, not gonna lie, we all do that in Hack the Box. We just search the CVE ID, POC, point and shoot.
And that's what a lot of these remind me of, right? Like a lot of these privilege escalation vulnerabilities, they tend to, sometimes they get weaponized, right? But a lot of them end up in the kind of the training realm where you search for, they get weaponized, and then, they might have a brief window of exploitation, but the industry patches them out, and then they end up in like the training kind of pillar, right? Where you find the CVE, you find the POC on GitHub or wherever, and it might be a Metasploit, it might be a Metasploit module or something, and then you're launching payloads against these compromised hosts to learn. So, part of that part of the industry is really kind of cool to see, how the CVEs kind of their life cycle. Obviously, like the big ones from 2017, 2016, all the shadow broker stuff is a very popular training target a lot of the time. But yeah, it's funny how they how that life cycle is. But I've never seen, at least in any of the ones I've done, like a Chrome breakout where you have like a vulnerable version of Chrome and you have to follow a specific exploitation path to compromise a system. So if you're a CTF vendor out there listening in, that'd be an interesting one.
Yeah.
To get into your system, in my mind anyway. But CVE 2024-30078, which is a Windows Wi-Fi driver remote
RCE
execution vulnerability.
Oh, so
And
good.
it reads, right? It reads, an unauthenticated attacker could send a malicious networking packet to an adjacent system that is employing a Wi-Fi networking adapter, which could enable remote code execution. Now, this to me feels like some late 90s security if I have ever seen it. And man, this is just not one of those like shaking your head type vulnerabilities.
It's pretty amazing. I mean, I would have definitely had some fun with this in my younger days. I just yeah, it's only a CVSS of 8.8, but that's because you have to have, close access. And I was happy to see it's at least not publicly disclosed or publicly, no known exploitation in the wild, but wow, just wildly damaging. And depending on the particulars of how the exploitation path looks, this could be something where, you could really snap up a lot of systems. I mean, this is bugs of this nature, while rare, are very dangerous, and they're dangerous because the danger comes from a different access to which people are used to. And what I mean by that is, this isn't great for exploiting somebody across the internet, and I am in Russia and I want to exploit a bunch of systems inside the United States. This is not the bug for you. But, if you're looking to, slap the Wi-Fi magnetic antenna on the roof of your Nissan Sentra and go like cruising around through the burbs and build you a little botnet, this thing's got your back, and it can, a bug of this nature. I mean, this could get corporate machines that are sitting there, and if you have people who are working from home, I mean, this is why I hardwire in my corporate machine and disable the Wi-Fi. That I live in fear of bugs like this from my younger days. But you also get lots of personal machines, and God, this would be a fun one for Black Hat and DEF CON this year. As a matter of fact, I'm sure there are people who are probably disappointed that this didn't come out after DEF CON, because this would have been a blast there, and probably still will be, because
yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Henry, right? Like, it's June, and that's not a lot of time to the beginning of August.
Yeah, and that reminds me of last year at DEF CON, where as we were walking around the conference, a few of us started getting spammed with, hey, do you want to connect to this Apple TV? It was over and over and over. And at first we were like, is there just is there an Apple TV around, or what is going on here? And one of our cohorts actually accidentally clicked like yes, because it was just spamming and spamming, and he was going to try to go to his messages. Well, it popped up on the bottom there. He hit continue. Nothing really happened, but then he was like, I think I'm going to wipe my phone just to be safe. And we later found out there was a researcher that posted on Twitter that they were just walking around with this Raspberry Pi, and it was just spamming BLE packets with this to every single iPhone. And I think some of the ramifications were that if you accepted, it would send some iCloud tokens or something, because you need those to connect to devices on the network. So the possibilities seem sort of endless for this one too, in like a physical setting.
And that individual will never go to DEF CON again with Bluetooth enabled.
Yep.
But yeah,
well, the scary part about that was, even if it was on airplane mode, it would still spam. So like, you would have to go physically turn off Bluetooth, because airplane mode didn't technically turn off Bluetooth. Right. That was another thing they found out.
This one is just absolutely wild. I'm kind of thinking of like war driving, but instead of looking for just unsecured networks, you're just trying to get an RCE. I'm just picturing someone sitting in like a white van outside of an office, just spamming, praying that they get some kind of RCE. So this is definitely one for the books.
Yeah, well, and close access bugs like this, because you have full remote access, far side of the internet. You have physical access. I can touch the machine. I can plug something in, and then you have close access, which is I'm within pretty standard RF range of my target, and close access bugs are rare, especially one that'll give you RCE on the victim system. But man, are they're wildly valuable. And this takes me back to my cyber command days where we'd be doing an exercise or something, and some very serious Air Force guy would come in, lay down a target package, and be like, okay, here's a simulated like building in Russia or wherever, and like, like, what are you guys gonna do to this building? Like, how are you gonna cyber it? And look at him like, okay, buddy, that's not how any of this works, because I have no, like, you've given me map coordinates on a grid, but like, just because you know where the building is or we could get close to the building doesn't give me any ability to access their networks, right? I need to find where they are on the internet. I need to characterize their IP space. I need to see what options I have to get in there, because that's how the majority of exploitation works. But with a bug like this, something like that is in the realm of feasible, where you could, fly by or drive by or go by in a boat from a distance with an antenna that's a very expensive version of a Pringles can, purchased by Uncle Sam, and point at the building and actually exploit into that place, because that place controls the thing that you're interested in, or whatever. These sorts of bugs are not science fiction. They're just rare, but that's what makes them so interesting, I think, because they really change people's threat models very quickly, because it adds that aspect that's most of the time just reserved for science fiction and bad TV shows.
Now, I know we're not supposed to hang on to a topic for too long, but I'm curious, honestly, if someone can't patch this, what realistic mitigations do they have?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard if they, and if you look at the operating systems that are affected, it's all of Windows 10, all of Windows 11, Server 2008, 2012, 2016, 2019, 2022. So that means it probably goes even back into like, I'd be a little bit surprised if this isn't in Windows 8.1, Windows 7, XP. Like this probably runs the full gamut. And if you don't have extended service on those, like, you're in some real trouble there. So, your obvious mitigation is to wire in with Ethernet and disable the Wi-Fi driver, but that's not always feasible for people. Like, some links, like, your only option really is Wi-Fi, and so
Better have logging.
You don't really have a good option there.
All you can really do is monitor for that activity, right? I mean,
right. And again, are we talking about a corporate system or a personal system? But like, this is a reason of, like, especially if you live in a population dense area, or God forbid you live around college students, might be time to upgrade that old gaming system that's still or testing toy system sitting in the corner that's still limping along on some old OS that doesn't get patches, because or finally run the Cat 5 over there, even if it's ugly and you don't have a good way, because that thing is now a serious liability.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just, typically the Wi-Fi kind of attack service was always focused around like the cryptography of Wi-Fi, right? Mm-hmm. I think back to like 2017 or 2018 and the crack attacks, right, in WPA2, where you were able to like read encrypted messages if you were in range of somebody. You were able to do like that attack, that crack attack, and it moving from that to RCE, I think, is just such a shock for a lot of people these days, because Wi-Fi is almost forgotten about, because most people just take it for granted these days. Like, it's safe, no one's going to do anything with it. And
but it was always about coexisting on the LAN. and taking advantage of coexisting on the LAN, not I'm just going to fire RCE straight at your system, easy peasy, one fell swoop. Like that's a whole new level of danger.
Yeah, so if you're bringing your laptop to DEF CON or Black Hat this year,
just don't.
Just don't. That would probably be the best, especially if it's a Windows device, you know. But I'm really curious how this one plays out the rest of today and the rest of really this month, because I feel like this is just, it's going to be a news cycle, right? Like one of those news cycle volumes that kind of gets us all paranoid about Wi-Fi attacks now, and all those vendors that were selling those Wi-Fi protection suites, you know, they're going to be spinning back up. And
I was just thinking that vendors are going to start coming out of the woodwork. Like, hey, I have a solution for that.
Can't wait for the PQ maps on this.
All the rogue access point detection stuff that, like, 10 years ago, everyone was really hell bent on because, you know, of those attacks, and it's, you know, it's all slowed down now, but all this stuff will, you know, reinvigorate all that.
Yeah.
Good times for sure. With
just thinking, like, with an MSP hat, you know, I don't know that I would really be, I mean, sure, my SSID, I've got everything password protected. I would just kind of move on from there. I wouldn't even think that this would be possible. And then, lo and behold, here we are.
Yeah. And you know there's going to be a gold rush to figure this bug out too. And
oh yeah,
there's going to be so many dazzling flavors of this on GitHub, and people are going to be putting modules in Metasploit. Like,
I can't wait.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, learn the learn what is this CVE 2024-30078. Learn it, because you're gonna hear this one for a while.
I mean, and there's some other good ones too, right? Like 2024-38053, which is this Windows Layer 2 Bridge Network RCE. And, you know, that's another one where I'm just like, honestly just shaking my head, because I feel like it's just, I'm on your local network, and
so
you have if you have a network adapter, so I'm plugged into the LAN, like, you're screwed, right? Like, that's how I'm reading it. But
I mean, this brings me back to, so it's, you know, late 90s, like 1997, hopefully past the statute of limitations. Ping of Death comes out. This might have been 96, 97. I'm a freshman at Carnegie Mellon, and Ping of Death comes out, and we had unlimited fun on that thing. Just like knocking over like your friends' computers and just kicking them offline.
Computers.
Yeah. Well, and then we had this one professor, and he had this like ancient Windows NT server, and so we would just like blast Ping of Death away at it, and like everyone on the floor would coordinate, because no one wanted to turn in it was Intro to Modern Math, which is just a terrible class, and nobody wanted to turn in their homework. So we would just like blast the Ping of Death at this NT server until it fell over. And this poor professor keeps going like, yeah, I added more RAM to that thing again. Like, I don't know. So sorry that it just can't handle a load of students turning in their homework. And we're all just like, you know, just keep blasting that thing away and getting more time to turn in our assignments. And we'd even get some students who were like, hey, like, I want to actually turn my stuff in on time. Can you guys just like give me 5 more minutes? But this feels, this layer 2 bridge network driver RCE feels like it's of that era where you just had these like kind of fundamental flaws, and this coupled with that, the Wi-Fi driver flaw from last month. I mean, obviously there's people looking around in some fundamental things that have been in Windows for a very long time.
Yeah.
And was this the one that they even had patches going back to server 2000, server 2008? I think this might have been.
Yeah.
I think most of them are.
Yeah. A lot of them, they went way back. They're even backporting some patches. You know, it's just like, these things have obviously been in there for a very long time and gone unnoticed. And, you know, that's pretty concerning. Same with the next one of, you know, 2024-38060, Microsoft Windows Codex Library RCE. it's a TIFF file, right? If you can upload a TIFF file to a server, you get RCE. And like, God, I think the last time I was playing around with TIFF files, I was no kidding on like Windows 3.1, like Windows 3.11, Windows for Workgroups. I don't even think I was playing around with them by the time I got to Windows 95. So, my goodness, how long has that thing been around?
Yeah,
that one just feels like so random. Like it's completely out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's like somebody's just going out and grabbing like old versions of Windows and then just fuzzing it and then saying like, is this code still there? And like, oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Something, because it's just, we're doing some greatest hits here.
I think on that one, I also question, because it says any authenticated attacker, like, does that mean guest users?
Yeah,
guest users are technically authenticated users. Like,
right.
Maybe make sure that that's disabled a bit to kind of mitigate, anonymous authentication. So
yeah, and it says no user interaction required. So, I mean, does the server just automatically say, oh, it's a TIFF file, let me kind of pre-parse it to generate an image preview or something, and that's how the code gets called? I'm not sure, but I'm guessing it is something along those lines. And it's just very wild, low effort, old school stuff that seems to keep popping up. Like it feels like it's accelerating, not decelerating.
Yeah, I'm interested to see that chain, to see kind of how that goes across.
Yeah. And then like those services, like if you're running IIS or another Windows service exposed to the internet, like what's the impact there, right? Because you just upload a file, it lands on disk. Like if it gets a preview, like you mentioned, Jason, right? Like if my IIS server is exposed here, like all this is kind of very loose on the details, but I think it provides such an interesting attack surface. And, standard Microsoft fashion, they save all the good stuff.
Yeah.
Message boards, right? Yeah, but I do agree. I feel like this year so far has been very, very like people exploring these old APIs that people haven't explored in a long time. And I also see it across other OSs too, like OS X. When we talked about it earlier this year, where they had all those RCEs in their image processing library, right? Like this all feels to me like once the White House released that, hey, everyone move to Rust.
Yep.
All this stuff starts popping up because I assume all this stuff's written in like C or C++ or some other C derivative, and it's not
because it's been around forever.
Right, exactly. And people are just, getting creative on the things that they're fuzzing and looking into.
CVE 38180. It's a SmartScreen prompt remote code execution vulnerability. This one has been found in the wild. It would be really easy to trick somebody into, engaging with this on their machine. It can, either be as simple as like a phishing email or a browser extension. And it looks like, the file could easily be disguised as some kind of application with a launcher that requests no UI. And, I think this really kind of speaks to understanding the importance of like what you're running on your device to your user base, and kind of engaging with them to be aware of what comes in the email, what browser extensions are coming in, things of that nature. I mean, that's just kind of what this speaks to me on.
Yeah, I think that's the scariest part of it, is how prevalent it could be in the browser extension world. I know that's something that's very challenging for a lot of IT folks, right? Is governing what can be installed in these browsers, because they don't need admin privs to do it.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. I've reviewed a lot of different browsers and managed browsers over the last few months, and there's a lot out there that can really help with this type of problem, at least in the browser extension world. But I swear, I always come back to education on like so many things in security, just making people aware of what can happen on their machine.
You
I think the simple call to action on that front is, Chrome is dominant, right? So we're all very likely using that in our environments. You might not have Chrome Enterprise deployed with your enterprise management suite, via Google Workspace. But you can still control those kinds of configurations on what extensions are allowed via your plist entries, via your MDMs, or you can use your EDR or some finer control tools like Autobox that can modify those config files and enforce some extension controls. So definitely talk to your vendors in your existing stack and see how they can help you manage your extensions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. And, with that, from the enterprise level, you have a little more protection, hopefully, with other, AV products and other controls that are in place. But from like a typical at-home user, this is specifically scary because, SmartScreen is a big deal in like kind of like a first line of defense thing, blocking malicious web pages and executables and things like that. So like, the at-home user, I feel, would be, more at risk on their personal device than the enterprise level, because hopefully at the enterprise level, you do have that extra protection.
Yeah. I feel like people are a lot more cavalier with what they do at home, especially like just your general user. Like, I'm not talking about obviously people like us, we do some pretty nutso stuff in our home stacks just for fun. But, just like your average user going into their email and maybe finding something, or like, oh, this new browser like lets you, I don't know, stream the Olympics or something like that from Chrome for free or something without having to get a Peacock subscription. Now, like next thing you know, your computer is just like completely taken over by someone. But yeah, you've got a pretty interesting kernel elevation one, Seth.
So CVE 38133, and this is a Windows kernel elevation of privilege vulnerability. So, as most people should know, the kernel, the Windows kernel, that's the core of the Windows operating system. So like, that controls everything at like a system level, right? So with this one, an attacker could exploit the vulnerability by, again, tricking a user into doing something. This time, it's sending a request to a malicious server. Then once that request is completed, and that could be from a phishing email, malicious executable, a drive-by malvertising ad, any of these things.
Wow.
They could bake this code into to connect to that server. Once connected, downloads that data to do arbitrary code execution. So if this whole thing is successful, they then have kernel level full system access admin privileges. So again, kind of like the last one, this is phishing, malvertising, malicious executables, shady web pages. That's kind of the go-to for a lot of these vulnerabilities. So, you got to take care, as usual with, you got to watch out for those phishing emails. And again, don't be streaming the Olympics for free without a subscription, because a lot of those sites, they got those malvertising ads baked in. So
yeah,
you can never be too cautious visiting those sites.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like your note on this for keeping OS and software up to date as kind of, because there's that preventative action that you can do right on the defense side, which is train your users on, avoiding phishing attempts and everything else as the ingress. But to be proactive is to continually update that environment and that operating system. To kind of segue the topic over to that of the broader world of Microsoft and how they are managing their operating system. I know a lot of us are, made that transition out of the server 2010 to 2012, and we're all bracing for impact to update to the next major version release. But it's all trending towards the new environment that like the Apple ARM world forced us into, in that kernel extensions are on their way out. There's a big kind of geopolitical thing behind it, where the EU made an argument that Microsoft was being anti-consumer and monopolistic and not allowing third-party apps to access the kernel. But I think all of these major kernel-based vulnerabilities and incidents that we've seen lately that are all centered around kernel access is helping Microsoft's case of updating their operating system to restrict that kernel access more and more. So pushing us more into user land than down into the subsystem. So for that, it's be proactive, prepare your environments for those major OS upgrades is what you should strategize for in the next year.
Yeah. And until then, get a really solid EDR.
CVE 2024 43491, and that's Microsoft Windows Update RCE. And this one is it's a doozy, and it's somewhere that like you said, whether it's your updater, right, which is like near and dear to us at Autobox, right? Because what do? We apply updates, and we manage configurations. So like we get this one on sort of an emotional level, that having a CVE at 9.8 in Windows Update really bad. And this one has the exploitation more likely. Right. So no current exploitation in the wild known, but that probably won't last. And this is it. I think this is a pretty juicy target. Wouldn't you think, Tom?
Yeah. And I found it interesting that it's very sparse on the details too.
Yeah.
Right. Like they're not trying to give anything away because
I don't blame them.
Right. Likewise.
Like I like more, but this is also one of those ones that like you just read the title alone and you're like, yeah, that's a do it now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm really curious, like the attack vector here too. Like, is this, like a bad, where are we getting these updates from? Right. That is it just
is it
thing, or I'm just,
or is it
a little bit more?
Is a configuration thing. Like, Windows 10 has that ability to pull updates from peers, and right. So is it using that sort of thing? But it doesn't say anything about the internet versus on network. I mean, the good news about this is not every version of Windows. It's Windows 10. As Tom pointed out to me, Tom said, "Hey, it's only Windows 10." And I said, "Oh, well, it's only 64% of the market. No big deal.
3 or 4 computers in the world, just a few."
I mean, actually, it's less than that. So the number I gave you, that 64% of the current Windows market. So it is the predominance of Windows systems, but not of the overall market. But still, like, that is a massive chunk of the internet, no matter how you slice it. And, in your update process, right? Like, so this isn't, we don't know all the details, but like, no matter how you slice it, like getting RCE through your update process probably means better than average shot that you can corrupt that update process to not only do whatever malicious thing, like your primary goal, but also to sort of lock it out so that it can't pull updates. So it's lying about what updates it pulls, right? Like, this is one where if you're going to patch it, like, patch it now, like right away now.
Absolutely. It's vaguely familiar to something, I think maybe last year or the year before that. Something similar like this happened in Windows Update itself. And I don't know if it was an RCE or something with they weren't verifying the searching correctly and when it was using TLS. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I'm pretty sure this isn't the only one I've seen in the last couple of years that was, directly impacted Windows Update. But this is one of those, put your tinfoil hat on ones.
Yeah. This one's spicy, and I would have loved to have this one in my old life. Although this, I'll be honest, this is one that would have definitely been disclosed to the vendor if the government had found it. Like, this is not one that anyone would play with, because that's bad.
Yeah, absolutely. I think is my favorite out of all of them, even though I think would be not so valuable as some of the other ones, but 2024 43533, which is a RCE in the remote desktop client, not the server, the client. And, my my kind of hack 'em back mindset, right? This one to me feels like you can create your own remote desktop server, and all those opportunistic scanners out there that are always scanning for RDP sessions, you could, kind of cause a little damage the other way. It's such an interesting attack path there, right? I was a little blown away by reading it, because it's not common to see these ones going the other way, right? Like, when most people think about vulnerabilities in RDP, they think about stuff in the RDP server and not in the client itself. So I felt like this one was very, very interesting, and it had some kind of, I don't know, nation state implications. If you could leverage a RDP server and those people scanning your infrastructure, you could potentially disrupt their scanning mechanisms, right? Like, that's where my head went when I read this. And I was just curious what you all thought about this one specifically.
Yeah, I think that'll be interesting, like you said, especially around nation state stuff, because they're constantly scanning everything, and the moment they find anything, it's a game of connect as fast as you can and get as much intel as you can, and now it's,
Yeah.
well, you connected, so what intel do you have for me?
Yeah, exactly. Like, careful what you're connecting to, because yeah.
I mean, that's probably huge too, because a lot of those services are probably like, they're not expecting that back connection attack, right? So that's probably able to drop you into a lot of those scanning companies, not even just nation states, but just any company that's scanning. Now you might have a pretty good in to something they thought was safe.
Yeah, true. Like, the census or
Yeah.
the Shodans of the world, where they're scanning RDP. I don't know if I know they do screenshotting. Now, I don't know if that's an RDP initiation or not, but I didn't even think about that. There's potential there for those companies that, yeah, good call. Definitely good call.
Yep. CVE 2024-5533. This is a Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Remote Code Execution vulnerability. This one has not been publicly exploited yet, but is kind of funny, because this one is actually for Windows Defender being able to do an RC. So this one, again, it does require user interaction. So clicking on a link, phishing, things like that, which people relying on AI these days, those phishing attacks are getting more and more complicated, complex looking, so a lot easier to trick users. So and then something else to point out, this one is only on Windows 10, specifically version 1809. And that is for both 32 and 64-bit. So if you are on Windows 11, this does not affect you. But yeah, again, basically, clicking on a link is required for this one. So there is user interaction.
Yeah, that one, when I was looking, really caught my eye too. And kind of to your point, it feels very ironic that an attacker could abuse a legitimate service, and not only a legitimate service, but the very service responsible for defending endpoints. And then, to your point about Windows only being Windows 10, it makes me wonder, like, what's different about the implementation of Defender for Windows 11 and Windows 10, but I'm sure Microsoft won't tell us.
And I think, if I'm correct, Windows 10 actually got extended by another year. So I'm wondering what kind of like challenges that kind of leaves Microsoft in to kind of develop around both of them right now, especially with how different they are.
Right.
So, but
Hey,
yeah.
And this one, too, I don't think there's really any, if I was reading correctly, there's nothing really any action to take in terms of patching. I think it was
I didn't see anything on patching for this one yet, so just something to keep an eye on. First one we got, CVE, is 2024-49093, and this is a Windows Resilient File System, REFS, Elevation of Privilege Vulnerability. Now, this guy, well, first off, the REFS, the file system, was actually developed for Windows Server 2012. It has since been integrated into Windows 10 and 11. So since that is now on those operating systems, we got to cover all those bases. Now, this specific vulnerability, it involves a scope change. And specifically, in this case, the attacker can start from a low privilege app container environment, which those typically restrict execution, just designed to isolate processes and, limit their access to other resources, right? So this vulnerability allows the attacker to elevate their privileges, obviously gaining access to a broader system level. So with the privilege escalation, that the attacker will move from a lower privilege container to a higher privilege container, therefore granting them their elevated privileges. And then also giving them access to additional resources, things like, anything on the system from files, memory processes, things that are outside of the app container. The other things with REFS, just to make sure we understand, there's some of the features there. You got your data resilience, scalability, improved performance, storage efficiency, things like that. So, that does a lot in the Windows environment, especially within virtualization, databases, backups, storage spaces, things like that. So that's a brief on REFS. The impact here is now going to be, if you have those systems, like specifically, Windows servers, then you can get in a situation where an attacker has escalated their privileges, and then they can start going east-west, affecting other servers, things like that. So that is, that's what makes this one pretty dangerous. Now, that being said, there haven't been any cases of this being exploited yet, but it's something to keep an eye out for, and make sure you stay patched.
Definitely.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, thanks for that bit of background, because REFS, that's a technology that I have almost no knowledge of. So that's something that I need to look into now.
Yeah, absolutely.